Hi, this is Matt K. Parker. I'm the author of A Radical Enterprise, Pioneering the Future of High-Performing Organizations, which came out from IT Revolution back in February. And I've had a lot of great feedback since the book came out. And I've also had a pretty consistent question, which is, this all looks awesome. I'd love for my organization to look like one of these organizations profiled in this book, but how do I get started? How do we get started turning our organization into a radically collaborative organization? So that's what I'm going to talk about now, but I'm not going to make any assumptions that you've read the book. It's okay if you haven't. I'm just going to very briefly sort of outline what you could find in the book, which I think will set the stage for the answers I'm about to provide. Okay, let's get started. So just real quick. So the punchline of the book is that the fastest growing and most competitive organizations in the world have no bureaucracies, no bosses, and no bullshit. And I use that term in a technical sense here. I think everyone who's been part of a very large company before has experienced some level of what could only be called corporate bullshit. And so the companies of the future seem to lack that. Okay, so these radically collaborative organizations have recently doubled in number. They currently comprise around 8% of the companies around the world. They include companies like Haier, which is a massive appliance manufacturer and smart home appliance manufacturer based out of China. They include the #1 tomato processor in the world, Morningstar, which is based in California. W. L. Gore is one of the longest running and most successful sort of experiments in radical collaboration on the planet. Started in 1958 in Delaware by a few chemists. They've created all kinds of stuff that we know and love today, like Gore-Tex waterproof fabric, Glide dental floss, Elixir guitar strings. And there are radically collaborative organizations without bosses, without bureaucracies, without bullshit. Another great organization is called Buurtzorg. They were started in the Netherlands about 15 years ago. They focus on home healthcare and really humanizing what it means to help the elderly in their homes. And they started in the Netherlands, where they've quickly come to dominate the home healthcare industry, but now they're spread around 25 countries around the world. So anyways, and I could go on. There's many other examples, including purely technology organizations, but this should give you a sense for some of the companies out there in the world doing this kind of thing, and that some of them are really big. Okay, the important thing to know is that these organizations are out competing other organizations on all kinds of different financial metrics, like increase in market share and business results and customer satisfaction, systemic innovation, employee loyalty, business model sustainability, willingness to recommend, et cetera, et cetera. And these companies I describe as radically collaborative. That's one of the many terms you can find for them out in the literature. Other terms include things like self-managing. So, but I just want you to know why I chose that term is because I think it speaks to the experience of what it's like to work in one of these companies, right? Radical collaboration is grounded in intrinsic motivation, right? So you have a lot of people in these companies doing what they actually enjoy doing and focusing on that day in, day out, and also freely making commitments to their peers, right? So there's a total lack of coercion inside these environments, which is pretty, I think, astonishing when you experience it, and it feels fundamentally different, hence the term radical, which means root or ground. Okay, so there are 4 imperatives that seem to underlie the success of these radically collaborative organizations that I talk about in the book. They are team autonomy, managerial devolution, deficiency need gratification, and candid vulnerability. So real quickly what those are. Team autonomy is what it sounds like, and there's many different dimensions of autonomy you can see teams exhibit within these companies, everything from how they work, so autonomy of practice, to what they're working on and what role they're playing, autonomy of allocation and autonomy of role, to when they're doing it and where they're doing it, so autonomy of schedule. There's also a marked process of managerial devolution. So these companies aren't devoid of management, even though they may be devoid of any sort of classical manager role within the company, right? So they're saying management is actually a shared responsibility, and by devolving into the organization at large, by decentralizing it, by distributing it, we actually can empower the organization to sense and respond much more quickly than our competitors can, which is how a company like Haier, for instance, has come to dominate their industry. So they have all kinds of approaches to managerial devolution within these companies, self-organized leadership teams, something called the advice process, holacratic governance. I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of them right now, but you can read all about them in the book. There's also compensation as another aspect of management that they've said is a shared responsibility that they've also devolved into the company, which is really, I think, taking aim at all the coercive aspects of a traditional organization and saying we're going to eliminate it. So these new sort of compensation models include things like the fractal compensation model, the Deming pay system, named after the forefather of lean manufacturing, W. Edwards Deming, self-managed pay, which is what it sounds like, people deciding what they make and deciding that and changing it whenever they want to, but doing it transparently. Okay, so lastly, imperative number 3 is deficiency need gratification. So I think all these companies have embraced the idea that what is good for people is good for business. That if they create environments that give people all the security, autonomy, fairness, esteem, trust, and belongingness that they need to feel good as a human being, then they'll actually have great results as an organization. A lot of psychologists in the mid-20th century, sort of like Maslow and Carl Rogers and many others, sort of hypothesized that this would be true, but it's only in the last 20 years that we've got a lot of hard empirical data that says it's absolutely true. And so they do that in all kinds of ways, and there's different stories I show in the book and different practices, things like peer pods, which are self-managed groups of peers providing ad hoc coaching and mentoring. There's practice of check-ins, so stating whatever is keeping you from being fully present when you're in a situation in a collaboration with others. There's balance scores, which is sort of saying how balanced you feel in the moment and being able to calibrate